What would you do if your daughter collapsed at your door at 1 a.m., bruised, bleeding, and broken by the very man who vowed to protect her? This is not just a story about abuse. It's a story about betrayal, justice, and a mother's unstoppable love. A woman, once a quiet cop in a sleepy town, transforms into a relentless protector when her daughter's screams replace the silence of the night. This is based on true events that mirror what many women endure in silence. A courtroom showdown, a secret affair, a forged land deal, and a town that turned its back until one woman decided enough was enough. If you believe in justice, in truth, and in the strength of women who refuse to stay silent, this video is for you. Let us know in the comments. Where are you watching from? And if you were in her shoes, what would you have done? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because stories like this can change lives. It was 1 a.m. when my life, my daughter's life, and everything I thought I knew about family split wide open. I had just turned off the TV after a long shift at the station. The kind of shift that leaves your body aching and your mind foggy. Outside, the night hummed with the restless noise of our neighborhood. A dog barking somewhere down the street, a motorcycle revving, the faint sound of a late-night argument drifting from a nearby porch. I tried to tune it all out, closing my eyes for just a second on the sofa. And then came the knock. Not a polite tap, not the nervous rap of a neighbor, but a frantic pounding that made my heart lurch. The sound rattled the doorframe, echoing through the quiet of my small living room. In one motion, my police instincts kicked in. My body tensed. My mind raced. Who in the world would come here at this hour? Who would knock like that at 1 a.m.? I grabbed the nearest heavy chair, not out of fear but readiness. My voice came out sharper than I meant. Who's there? Silence. Then, another knock, weaker this time, as if whoever was out there had used the last of their strength. Mom, please open up. The voice hit me like a jolt of electricity. My daughter, Sarah. I froze for half a second, my fingers fumbling at the lock before my training and my mother's instinct collided. I swung the door open, and there she was, my Sarah. The girl who used to chase fireflies barefoot in our yard. The girl whose laugh could fill a room. Now standing on my doorstep in the harsh glow of the porch light, trembling like a wounded animal. Her lips were split. Her left eye was so swollen she could barely open it. She was clutching her stomach with both hands as if holding herself together. Before she could even speak, her knees buckled. She collapsed into my arms, sobbing, whispering something that made my blood run cold. My husband hit me because of his mistress. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. The world seemed to tilt. Time stretched thin like glass about to shatter. I felt her weight, light and shaking, and I thought of every moment I had promised to protect her. My arms tightened around her, guiding her inside. Sarah, honey, you're safe. You're home now, I murmured, though my voice was trembling. I closed the door behind us, shutting out the night, but not the nightmare she just brought to my doorstep. The yellow porch light flickered once, casting our shadows across the floor, and in that flicker, I saw everything differently. The daughter I raised, broken. The son-in-law I had trusted, revealed as a stranger in the kitchen. The clock ticked softly, 1:02 a.m., and I felt my heart pound against my ribs like a drum. Sarah sat hunched on the sofa, hands still clutching her abdomen. She looked smaller than I remembered, as if the blows had stolen not just her strength but her presence. I crouched in front of her, pushing her hair back gently. Sweetheart, tell me what happened. Her eyes darted to the door as if afraid he would follow. He found out I knew about Denise, she whispered. He lost control. Denise. The name was like a knife twisting in my gut. I had heard it before in whispers, but never from Sarah's mouth. My training told me to act fast. Check for injuries. Call for medical help. Preserve evidence. But the mother in me just wanted to cradle her, to undo every moment that had led her here. I forced my hands steady as I fetched a damp cloth, wiping the blood from the corner of her mouth. It was already dried to a rusty brown, a cruel echo of the violence she had endured. She winced but didn't pull away. Her hands trembled as she whispered, Mom, I didn't know where else to go. Inside me, something broke and something else ignited. I had seen victims of violence before, too many. But this wasn't just another case file. This was my daughter, Outside, the neighborhood noise continued. Motorcycles, dogs, muffled laughter. The world kept spinning while my living room became a crime scene. I looked at Sarah's bruised face, at the small streaks of blood on her blouse. And in that moment I knew. This wasn't just about comfort. This was about justice. I didn't say it out loud, but in my mind I swore. He will never lay a hand on you again. He will never get away with this. The clock ticked on. My police badge hung by the front door, gleaming faintly in the dim light. My uniform waited in the closet. My daughter lay broken on my sofa, and I sat there, mother and cop, heart racing, already making a plan. Because some knocks in the night are cries for help, and some nights are the line between who you were and who you're about to become. The minutes stretched like hours, each tick of the clock reminding me how little time there was to act. I sat beside Sarah on the sofa, my arms around her, her body trembling. Her sobs finally slowed to shallow gasps. I pressed a cloth to her split lip and slipped open the first aid kit. The blood was still fresh, vivid against her pale skin. Her bruise was blooming across her cheekbone. She winced as I cleaned the wound, but she stayed silent. I watched her fingers curl around the edge of the sofa cushion, knuckles white. She looked smaller than I ever remembered. "Mom," she whispered, voice raw. "I'm sorry I came here. I didn't want to wake you." I shook my head. "You did the right thing, honey. You came to me when you had nowhere else to go." In that moment, I saw more than her tears. I saw something in her eyes. Fear, exhaustion, but also resolve. The same resolve I recognized in myself as a cop. I promised her safety, but inside I knew that promise would cost me more than I anticipated. As I taped gauze over her lip, I let my eyes roam her body. Her blouse was stained in places, and her abdomen was swollen. The bruise she clutched earlier was deep, dark, angry. It looked like more than one strike, the kind of violence that doesn't forget easily. I reached out and gently lifted her blouse to inspect. Her face blurred as I focused, but the bruise there shook me to my core. I felt a squeeze in my chest, like a fist was tightening around my heart. This wasn't a bar fight. This was domestic warfare. My police training took over, tempering my mother's panic. I took photos, close-ups of the bruise on her stomach, her wrists, her lip. I used my phone's flash, sharp white light that burned the wounds into memory. Every picture was a burning question. Who? How? Why? I backed up the images, password protected. I gathered the medical kit, the cloths, the phone. Everything fragile became evidence. Outside, in the quiet night, I heard a soft creak of a floorboard, a noise that snapped me out of numbness. Sarah pressed closer. I heard a distant whisper of voices, muffled, but present. I frowned. Do abusers sometimes test the water after they strike? In the soft glow of lamplight, Sarah's phone lit up with notifications, missed calls, texts from a name I knew too well. Robert. 7 missed calls. Some messages flashing on the lock screen. Open your mouth or lose everything. I felt bile rise in my throat. I reached to grab the phone, my instinct screaming to read everything. But Sarah's panicked hand shot out, snatching it away. "Mom, don't look," she sobbed. "He'll punish me more if you do. Please." I froze. The edges of the threat widened. I swallowed. I nodded. There was fear in her eyes. Fear of exposing the truth. Fear of the consequences. But also guilt that I might shame her more by uncovering secrets she wasn't ready for. I squeezed her hand. "Okay, love. I won't look. You're safe. I'm here." We piled into a taxi, me supporting her, helping her in, adjusting the blanket over her shoulders. She sank into the seat as if she lacked the strength to sit up. As the car pulled away, I stared after the house's dark windows. No answer when I'd knocked before. No sign of life. Just silence. The journey to the hospital felt long, every bump in the road echoing in my bones. She leaned her head on my shoulder, breath shallow. She murmured, "I had to get away. I couldn't take it anymore." I let her cry. No words, just fist-tight patience in the hospital. Dr. Figueroa waited. Her face was serious but gentle. As they took her in for examination, I followed, feeling the weight of what had just begun. We passed fluorescent hallways. Nurses hurried. Equipment beeped. I stayed quiet, alert. When the nurse removed Sarah's jacket, I nearly gasped. Bruises purple, reddish decorated her wrists, shoulders, even lower ribs. The scene made me sick, but I didn't cringe. I was in work mode now. I leaned close. "Mom?" she called softly. I touched her shoulder. "I'm here, sweetheart." Dr. Figueroa consulted. She described contusions, the possibility of internal injury, needing x-rays, doing tests. I nodded, letting her talk, but my mind raced ahead, mapping what I would do next. When Sarah was stable, I stepped out to sign paperwork, treatment consent, deposit, release waivers. My hands trembled. My heart thundered. Every paperwork clause felt like a battlefield line. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I saw it half read, then declined. I refused to be baited. I had a suspicion. It was Robert. His name should mean nothing now. Back in the room, Sarah lay with closed eyes, eyelashes damp, her body fragile. I sat by the bed. I remembered her giggling as a child, chasing me in the yard, calling, "Mom, look at me." That Sarah felt distant now. I tucked a blanket around her better, sat silent until she slept. Then I slipped onto the porch, breathing in the night air, trying to calm the storm inside. Miss Camila appeared across the street, broom in hand. She approached, concern in her eyes. I explained softly. He hit her. He drove her out. She had to come here to me. She frowned. "No one should live like that." I hesitated, then asked, "Miss Camila, your camera, did it record anything last night?" She nodded immediately, offers her phone, showing videos. I leaned in. There it was, Sarah's desperate knock, muffled sobs. The evidence I needed. My heart ached. But in that moment, I felt something else. Possibility. Proof. Exposure. Justice inching forward. Inside the house, I changed into my police uniform, the badge, the belt, the weapon, each piece a tool of duty. I loaded bullets. I looked at Sarah sleeping behind me. I dialed James, the lawyer. "Start the plan now." I knew from that moment, there was no turning back. The war had begun. The early morning light seeped through hospital blinds as Sarah lay under blankets of sterile white, drifting in a shallow sleep. Her chest rose and fell in tremors. Her face, swollen and bruised, was silent testimony to the violence she suffered. The quiet of the hospital room felt heavy, as if the air itself knew something had broken. I sat by her bedside, phone in hand, the USB drive and photographs pressed into my other palm. My mind replayed every detail. The bruises, the video from Ms. Camilla's camera, Sarah's trembling voice. Every moment became part of a map in my mind. I could already piece together the path Robert had taken. I leaned forward, brushing a tear from Sarah's cheek. She stirred, eyes fluttering open. Pain was in her gaze. "Mom," she whispered. I forced a steady voice. "You're safe. They're examining you now. You rest." She closed her eyes, spent. I rose and quietly exited the room, closing the door behind me. Hallway lights glowed in sterile bulbs. I needed space to think, to process. I went to the nurse's station, asked about timing for x-rays and scans. Confirmed the doctor's plan. Full evaluation. No fractures so far, but internal injury was still possible. That was enough warning. I retreated to the waiting area and sat, the weight of what I had to do settling over me like a storm cloud. The camera video I had just watched, Sarah pounding at my door, would become Exhibit A. The photos of her bruises, Exhibit B. The hospital report, Exhibit C, and Robert's mistress, Denise, would be a wild card witness. I powered on my laptop inside the sterile waiting area, connecting the USB drive. The video, time-stamped 1:02 a.m., played in front of me in a darkened screen. I saw Sarah's weak knocks, muffled sobs, nearby shrubs, the walkway, the faint hum of the night. That video was more than evidence. It was motion, motive, confession by omission. My fingers flew as I copied the video to a secure folder. I encrypted it. I backed it up. I cross-linked every file with the photos I'd taken earlier. I started drafting a digital case dossier. Then my phone lit up. Robert M. missed call. My blood froze. I ignored it. I refused to answer. Let him call. Let him know fear. Inside, my heart hammered with a mixture of rage, fear, and resolve. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. After a while, I returned to Sarah's room. She lay still, peaceful in innocence, but I knew the fight was already happening on her behalf. I sat by her side, held her hand. She took a shallow breath. I whispered, "I've got this, sweetheart. I'll not let him hurt you again." Later, after treatment, the hospital released Sarah home under observation. Her injuries were serious but survivable. I ensured she would rest at Ms. Camilla's home, a safe place. I couldn't bring Sarah into our home just yet. It would risk exposure, retaliation. That afternoon, I met with James, our lawyer. In his modest office, I placed the USB, photos, hospital report before him. He flipped through each item carefully, eyes narrowing, jaw tight. "This is solid," he said quietly. "We have assault, domestic violence, battery. We also have possible forgery, land fraud. If the land documents you suspect are real." I nodded. That forgery suspicion had gnawed at me ever since I saw the public registry anomaly. Robert had forged Sarah and my signatures. He had stolen what was ours. Now we had to prove it. James leaned forward. "We need witness testimony. Denise, Ms. Camilla, Sarah's doctors. Enough to create a chain of corroboration." He'll push back with rhetoric. "False accusation, emotional mother. You must stay steady." "I understand," I replied. Inside, I felt my lungs fill with cold determination. That night, I donned my jacket and jeans, unassuming, unthreatening, and slipped into the dark street outside the bar Sarah said Denise frequented. Neon signs flickered in the drizzle. The smell of stale beer, neon lights, cigarette smoke hung thick. I parked a block away. I watched. I waited. Around 8:15 p.m., a silver sedan pulled up. A woman in red, Denise, emerged. Immediately, I suspected. Robert was behind her, the two entering a small hotel. Overhead sign glowed red. I stayed concealed, camera in hand. I snapped pictures. Denise's face, Robert's silhouette, their kiss in furtive embrace. The license plate, the time stamp on nearby storefront clocks. Each image was a needle in Robert's map of lies. After they entered, I waited, snapped one more shot of their license plate, and drifted back in my car. Back home, I copied the photos into the dossier. Every file had a label. By hand, photograph timestamp, hotel entrance night, at 2:30 a.m. I sat in my quiet kitchen. Sarah slept at Ms. Camilla's. The dossier lay open before me. I reviewed the evidence one more time. My life as a police officer, as a mother, had merged. I had to play both roles impeccably. And then I made a call to Commander Rosales, my trusted colleague. I read him the facts, video, photos, registry anomalies. I asked him to discreetly station patrols to protect Sarah and Ms. Camilla, and to alert him that I was going public unless Robert cooperates. He agreed, voice grave. "Elizabeth, you're walking a dangerous road. Be careful." I hung up. Danger was acceptable now, because the cost of silence was too high. Before dawn broke, I emailed James. "I think tomorrow we file restraining order, land fraud lawsuit, domestic assault claim. Robert will have no safe harbor." Then I exhaled. I looked at the uniform in the closet. My path was set. This wasn't just about defending my daughter. It was about making sure that for every blow she took, there would be accountability. Because sometimes the truth you most fear is the one you have to carry forward. And sometimes, the darkest nights give birth to your fiercest purpose. The morning after the photography chase, I couldn't rest. I awoke before dawn, the house silent. Sarah wasn't with me. She was safe at Ms. Camilla's. I stood in my living room, the dossier spread on the dining table, and considered the next move. The physical abuse, the video evidence, the infidelity, all were important, but something else tugged at me. The strange land transfer I'd discovered, signed with our names, filed under Robert's direction. I remembered how Romero Alcazar, the public registry official, had told me that documents were signed in our names and delivered by Robert. The land was our inheritance. It wasn't just property, it was legacy. And now, it was being stolen. I called Romero's extension before breakfast. We arranged a meeting. I needed photocopies, referenced versions, chain of title comparisons. He agreed to meet me secretly in his office later that day, under the condition of discretion. He warned me, if the wrong people notice, we risk interference. I told James. He nodded. We'll add forgery and real property fraud to the case. He won't see that coming. His voice was calm, but I heard urgency beneath at mid-morning. I drove to the registry building. The sun was unforgiving, early August heat already climbing. I parked in a shadowed alley, walked across the courtyard, and slipped inside. The building was stately, marble floors, high ceilings, bureaucratic whispers. Somehow, corruption always wore the guise of respectability. Romero greeted me, eyes darting. He led me to a back office. He swallowed as he handed me bound copies of the land registry files. Paper after paper. Each page carried signatures resembling our names, notarized stamps, filing dates. The forged signatures were pale imitations, shaky, lacking flourish. He also gave me notes, log entries of who handled the filing, who authorized it, what internal handoffs. One clerk's name I recognized, a minor official known to accept favors. My pulse raced as I flipped through the pages. Robert's name as petitioner, my name and Sarah's as grantors. The transfer occurred 2 nights ago, after the attack. The timing spoke volumes. This wasn't a random fraud. It was retaliation, seizure, power. I handed the files to Romero. Thank you, but we need protective custody of these copies. He nodded, resolute. I'll make duplicates and hide originals until the court freezes the file. I walked away with the files in a secure folder, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The registry's grand hallway suddenly felt like a trap. Come afternoon, I met James and Sarah at a dusty cafe. Sarah's eyes still swollen but steel behind them. She stared at the legislature papers. I placed the folder before us. She gasped, "That's mine." "That's ours." She touched the top page like it hurt. Tears threatened. I squeezed her hand. "I told you. I wouldn't let him take this too." James laid out the legal plan. File motion to nullify transfer. Ask for prelim injunction. Serve papers on Robert and those involved. Meanwhile, build layers of evidence. The attack, the forged documents, the land fraud. The combined weight would be undeniable. We parted. I dropped Sarah at Ms. Camilla's, watching her limp across the walkway. Each step was heavy. I promised her, today we step further than her bruises. We strike at the roots. That evening, under cover of twilight, I drove to Robert's pawn shop. I parked a block away. The shop's neon sign flickered. Inside, mechanics and cashiers. I entered, acting casual. I saw Robert in his back office counting wads of bills. He looked up, a flicker of recognition, then a sneer. I walked to the counter. "Robert Mendes?" I asked, voice firm. He smirked. "Mother-in-law at your service." He laughed. "What brings the cop in jeans to my domain?" I placed the file on his desk. "This," he froze as he saw the pages. "Your forged paperwork. Your land theft attempt. You used my daughter and me like pawns." He rose suddenly. 2 of his men stood behind. I didn't back down. I reached inside my jacket and revealed my badge. It glinted under fluorescent light. They froze. Robert's face flushed. He slammed the desk, shouted threats. "You can't do this." He tried to approach. I stared him down, my voice cold. "The law can. This ends here." I turned and walked out, leaving him furious, vulnerable. Outside, I exhaled. 1 step further. 1 move forced his hand. That night, I returned home. The dossier grew heavier in my mind. The path ahead was dangerous, but the land theft was the key. The land was tangible. The bruises heal. The video fades. But rusting signatures and corrupted documents are physical evidence. Tomorrow, we file. We confront him in court. We expose everything. I poured a bowl of chicken soup, placed it by Sarah's bed, watched her sleep. I sat beside her, whispering, "They can't erase you. They can't steal this." In the quiet of night, I dressed in plain clothes again, hid the folder, and stared out the window at the land losing its name. I traced boundaries until dawn. This fight was no longer just for her body. It was for their soul, their inheritance, their dignity. Because sometimes, in the war for justice, the ground beneath your feet is as important as the wounds in your heart. By dawn the next day, my kitchen table looked like a war room. Stacks of manila folders, USB drives, printouts of texts, and photographs lay spread across the surface. The smell of strong coffee drifted through the room, trying and failing to cut through the weight of what I was about to do. Sunlight pushed weakly through the blinds, lighting up the badge on the table next to my cup. I had promised my daughter safety, but now I understood safety wasn't something you waited for. It was something you built. I glanced at the hallway. Sarah was still asleep at Ms. Camilla's house, safe for the moment. I poured my coffee, sat down, and opened my notebook. At the top of the page, I wrote 3 words in block letters: plan, evidence, justice. The previous night's confrontation with Robert had shifted the balance. For the first time, he had been forced to see me not as his mother-in-law, but as a police officer. But I knew his arrogance wouldn't fade. It would mutate. Men like him didn't go quietly. They counterattacked, spun lies, painted themselves victims. My job was to make the truth louder than his noise. James arrived just after 8. He took one look at the table and whistled low. "This is already stronger than some cases we see after months," he said, sitting across from me. I handed him the newest evidence, Romero's copies of the forged land transfer. He scanned them, nodding. "We'll move for an injunction today, with the medical records, the photos, the video from Ms. Camilla's camera, and now this." He's cornered. He paused, then added, "But Elizabeth, you need to be ready. He'll play dirty. He'll try to turn the town against you." I exhaled. "He already has. I can feel it in the whispers." James leaned forward. "Then we make this about facts, not rumor. Let's get everything filed before noon. That will freeze his access to the land and give us legal leverage. After that, we push for a restraining order and criminal charges." I nodded. My mind was already jumping ahead. Witness statements, medical testimony, surveillance footage, financial records. Each piece of paper was a brick in a wall he couldn't climb by mid-morning. Sarah called from Ms. Camilla's number. Her voice was small but steadier than the day before. "Mom, I'm scared." He called one of my friends, asked where I was. He said if she lied, he'd come after her too. I closed my eyes, anger pressing hard behind my ribs. "Stay put. Commander Rosales has a patrol on your street. He won't get near you," I said, keeping my tone calm for her sake. After I hung up, I called Rosales immediately. He reassured me extra patrol cars were already stationed nearby. Still, I knew threats had a way of slipping through cracks. Back at the station, I found my old digital camera, the one I'd used to document crime scenes. I inserted the memory card from the night before and began cataloging each image. I numbered them, time-stamped them, cross-referenced with locations. The bar, the hotel, the license plate, the bruises on Sarah's body. Each flash of the camera had been a heartbeat of rage. Now each file became an anchor of proof. James returned in the afternoon with stamped court filings. "We're in," he said, placing them on the table. "He's been served notice. The land transfer is frozen until the hearing. The restraining order will be reviewed tomorrow, and the DA's office has agreed to look at the assault charges." I felt something shift inside me. Not relief exactly, but a sense of movement, as if the ground under my feet had finally started to tilt toward justice. That evening, I drove Sarah to her first therapy appointment with Anik Roga, the psychologist James recommended. Watching her walk slowly toward the office door, shoulders hunched, I felt my heart twist. My daughter, who once lit up every room, now carried herself like a shadow. I waited in the lobby, staring at the pale green walls, thinking of all the women I'd met on the job who came in broken and silent. Now my own daughter was one of them when Sarah came out 45 minutes later. Her eyes were red but her breathing steadier. "It helps to talk," she whispered. I squeezed her hand. "We're not alone in this," I said softly. "Not anymore." On the way back to Ms. Camilla's, Sarah spoke for the first time about Denise. "She comes to the house. She mocks me. She laughs while Robert." She trailed off, tears spilling again. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. I didn't answer. Not yet. But inside, a plan began to form. I dropped Sarah off under the watch of Rosales' patrol car and went home. The house was dark except for the glow of the laptop screen. I sat down, pulled up the files again, and stared at Denise's face in the photographs. She was a key. She had been part of Sarah's torment, but she might also be the way to break Robert's facade. By midnight, my coffee was cold. The table was covered in papers. My badge lay beside the stack, its metal catching the lamplight. I reached out and touched it, feeling its weight. I wasn't just a mother. I wasn't just a cop. I was both, and that was my advantage. I typed a note to myself on the laptop screen. Find Denise. Flip Denise. And this, because this wasn't just a case anymore. It was a line in the sand, and I was ready to cross it. The nights that followed felt like a different world. Darker, longer, loaded with tension. I knew Robert would try to retaliate, to bury us with rumors, lies, maybe even threats. But I also knew that I had one asset he didn't expect: the quiet determination of a mother and a detective united in purpose. Denise had become the pivot point in my calculations. If she would speak, or even break, she could destroy Robert's control, his alibis, his denials. She was the linchpin in his facade, but persuading her to flip would be delicate. She needed reason to survive this, not just fear of exposure. I watched the hotel from a distance. Windows lit dimly. Cars came and went. I sat in my car, headlights off, camera ready on my lap. I observed Denise exiting, cigarette in hand, heels clicking on pavement. Robert followed, the two of them moving in tandem, shielding each other. Shadows wrapped around their silhouettes. I snapped photographs. Her face, leaning close to Robert, his arm around her waist. I got her license plate, the hotel sign, the time stamp on a nearby clock. Every frame making their liaison concrete. Each shot another stone dropped in the pit Robert was digging for himself. Over the next few days, I traced Denise's routines. Local cafe near her apartment, the bar she frequented. I cross-checked her phone records, addresses, social media breadcrumbs, legal subpoenas through James, her debt records, bank transfers, all the usual patterns. Then one night, I slipped into the bar where Denise often appeared. The music was loud, smoky haze heavy in the air. I sat in a corner booth, watching the entrance. She came in, red dress, red lipstick, confident posture. She paused, scanning the room. I recognized that moment, the predator surveying the field. I stood and approached. She stiffened when she saw me. I kept my voice calm. "Denise," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. "We need to talk." She looked at me warily, eyes flashing. "Why, who are you?" "Someone who wants you safe," I replied gently. "Someone who knows what you're caught in. Help me, help Sarah. You tell the truth at trial. You cooperate. You can spare yourself more damage." She laughed, dark, short. "You think I'm just going to turn on him for your daughter?" I pulled out a photo, slid it across the table. "This is him with you last night, entering the hotel. That's your face. You can deny it all you want, but the world might not believe you. The police will believe you. He can't back this off." Her hand trembled as she touched the image. The flicker of fear crossed her features. I took a softer tone. "You have a choice, Denise. Stay silent and get burned, or speak up and find safety. I can get you protection, witness relocation. The DA's office will support you. But first, you must choose to step out of his shadow." She looked torn. Her eyes darted to the door as if checking for henchmen. She leaned over, voice low. "He told me I'd lose everything if I talk. He controls so much. Money, people, reputation." I nodded. "I know, but let me help you carve one thing he can't take. Your freedom. Tell the truth, and he will fall." She swallowed. Tears glimmered. I saw the moment she slipped from defiance toward fear. I stood, placing one last binding glance on her. "Think it through. I'll find you when you're ready, with protection." She didn't answer. I walked away. The night swallowed me. By the next morning, I had subpoenas ready. Denise's records, financial statements, phone logs. James had already forwarded them to the DA's office. The court had agreed to seal certain protections for Denise under provisional witness status. Days later, a lawyer assigned to her delivered a letter. Denise said she would testify, provide full disclosure, but asked for anonymity and relocation for her safety. James accepted, with limits. We would push for an order that shielded her identity, prevented Robert's team from hunting her down. Meanwhile, Robert raged in private. He spat threats. His lawyer, Valdivia, called us. "You're playing dangerous games. My client will countersue. My client will smear your names. Don't think your evidence will hold in court." I listened. I didn't respond. Their threats were what I expected. Noise against substance. The evidence I had was durable. The forged land documents, the photos, the video, Denise's impending testimony. Together they would bend the structure of his defense. Sarah's therapy progressed. She spoke more, shared nightmares. I sat with her, held her when she trembled in dreams, told her she was safe now, that we were working for justice. In her weakness I saw strength, the catalytic pain that gave her voice back. One evening, late, I received a call from the DA's investigator. He confirmed that Denise had arrived safely at a relocation facility. He asked me to submit my materials. The case was being assembled. He believed we had strong grounds for assault, forgery, land theft. It felt surreal. The wounds on Sarah's face, the shadows following Denise, the whispered threats, all moving toward a courtroom where Robert's lies would be forced laid bare. I stood in the dark hallway of our home when I got off the call. The uniform hung in the closet behind me, the badge on my dresser. I touched them both. That path, the one I stepped onto when Sarah collapsed, was no longer about vengeance. It was about justice. For my daughter. For truth. For the promise I made as her mother and as an officer. You will not suffer in silence. Because in the shadows, I had forged weapons, proof, testimony, exposure. And soon, Robert would see that the shadows he thought protected him were the very lines that would trace his downfall. The day settled heavy and somber, as though even the sky knew the gravity of what was to come. When Sarah and I reached the courthouse, the columns looked cold and permanent, silent guardians of the law. The estimates of the crowd whispered through marble halls. Reporters, neighbors, observers. We stood at the threshold of confrontation, where truth would face lies. Sarah's hand trembled in mine. I squeezed it gently, steadying us both. "We're ready," I said softly. She nodded, trying to straighten her posture. Her bruises still marked her face and arms, but her spirit appeared steadier, lit by the possibility of justice. Inside the courtroom, polished wood, low murmur, heavy curtains. At the bench sat Judge Ortega, eyes sharp behind glasses. Robert sat at the defendant's table, flanked by Valdivia and his attorneys, faces tight with pretense. Denise sat in a side seat, partly hidden, her posture anxious but resolute. Miss Camila appeared in the gallery, a quiet sentinel of support. I felt small in that corridor, but the strength of our evidence made me feel immense. James began, calm and measured. He introduced the case: assault, land fraud, forgery. He laid out the timeline, each piece linked. Sarah's collapse, the video from Ms. Camila, the land registry anomalies, Denise's impending testimony. Then he asked me to take the stand. My heart pounded as I crossed to the witness box. I adjusted my badge, not from my policing days, but from who I was now, a mother defending her child before the law. I took the oath. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I began with the night, the knock at my door. I described Sarah's injuries, showed my photos, presented the video. I let the montage of evidence speak in visual clarity. I talked about the abnormal land transfer. I explained Denise's involvement and her choice to testify. I did not hide my hurt or my rage. I let it be part of the truth I carried. Then came cross-examination by Valdivia. He leaned forward, voice sharp. "Mrs. Arriaga, is it not true that you abused your badge to manipulate evidence?" I met his gaze evenly. "No," I said. "I documented what I saw, what my daughter endured. I used my experience to preserve truth, not distort it." He twisted. "So you admit to having bias. You are her mother. Would you not do anything to protect her, even exaggerate?" I took a breath. I love Sarah more than life, but I am here to prove facts, not emotions. The bruises, the video, the footprints in the registry, they exist independent of my love. The courtroom grew still. Even Robert's lips parted, as though his defenses momentarily faltered. Next came Denise's testimony. She walked up, hand trembling, her voice soft but clear. She told of her involvement, the meetings with Robert, the pressure he applied, how he had coerced her into false documents, how she regretted her role in Sarah's pain. She admitted she had been complicit, but chose truth once she saw the evidence. Her testimony cut through the lies like a scalpel. I watched Robert shrink, color draining from his face. Then they called Dr. Figueroa. She described Sarah's injuries, contusions, soft tissue trauma, the medical opinion that these were not accidental, that the bruise on her abdomen could only result from blunt force. She confirmed the photographs matched the injuries. She affirmed that Sarah's injuries were consistent with assault. Next came the registry witnesses. Romero Alcazar testified in hushed tones about the land documents, their suspicious signatures, who submitted them, which internal hands handled them, how Robert had visited the office with documents in hand. The fraudulent transfer was carefully mapped out, chain of custody shown. The judge's face was unreadable. The tension built. Finally, Robert was called to testify. He rose with stiff posture, voice sharp and threatening. He denied everything: the beating, the land theft, the forged signatures, the mistress. He framed Denise as a misguided woman, claimed Sarah had emotional motives, alleged I had sought to manipulate the evidence and influence town opinion. He called me vindictive and biased. He repeated his narrative that Sarah's bruises were accidents, that he never physically harmed her. But when he denied Denise's testimony, the courtroom held its breath. When he denied visiting the registry office, the documents and Romero's testimony contradicted him. When the forged script pages were presented in court, his face went pale. His attorney stammered. The judge asked, "Sir, can you explain these signatures on the land registry? In your own handwriting, filed under your control?" He faltered, eyes shifting, tongue twisting. He had no plausible answer. The jury's faces were stern, absorbed. Miss Camila sat and wiped tears. Sarah bit her lip. I looked at my daughter, vulnerable in her bruises, stronger by the moment. When closing arguments came, James hammered. This case is about abuse of power. Physical, emotional, legal. We have video, medical evidence, hematoma matches, registry evidence, and a willing witness in Denise. The defendant's denials cannot counter the weight of proof. Valdivia countered with claims of manipulation, of biased motherhood, of self-serving motives. He painted us as opportunistic, but his words rang hollow against the evidence we had laid bare. Then Judge Ortega stood, voice solemn. He thanked the jury for their service and excused them to deliberate. We waited. The hush was suffocating. I sat in the gallery, Sarah a few seats away. She looked at me, eyes wet but hopeful. I squeezed her hand quietly, told her we had told the truth. After what felt like eternity, the jury returned. The foreperson stood. We, the jury, find the defendant, Robert Mendez, guilty on all counts. Assault, forgery, land fraud. A hush fell. Sarah gasped. Robert's face twisted. I exhaled, a rush of relief, anguish, vindication. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I stood and embraced my daughter. The courtroom erupted. Some cheered, some cried, some stared in shock. But in that moment, I didn't feel triumph. I felt justice delivered. I felt the weight of her pain turned against the perpetrator's lies. I felt that my promise had been kept as the judge pronounced orders: restoration of land to us, nullification of the forged transfer, protection order, criminal penalties for Robert. I heard the thud of fate against those who believed they could silence us. I led Sarah out, arm in arm. The midday sun shone on the courthouse steps. Whispers ran through the crowd. She won. Justice, truth maintained. Miss Camila clasped her hands, eyes glistening. Denise slipped away, her testimony completed, her face quieter but freer. Outside, as we stepped into the blaze of day, I closed my eyes. I had stood as both mother and law enforcer. I had converted pain into power. And as we walked downward from the court, I whispered into Sarah's ear, "Your voice was never lost. Today, you got it back." We walked out of the courthouse under the midday sun, our silhouettes long on the steps. Sarah's arm looped in mine, her posture steadier than I had seen in weeks. The verdict had been delivered. Justice had spoken. But our journey was far from over. The crowd parted. Whispers trailing us. She won. That mother fought. The land is hers again. I held my head high, but I felt the weight of everything we'd carried to get here. Each bruise, each knocked door, each dark night of gathering proof. They had led to this moment. In the days following, the legal machinery moved decisively. The forged land transfer was nullified. The property reverted to Sarah and me. Robert's records were sealed for investigation. The protection order barred him from approaching, from any contact. Robert's defense team threatened appeals, smear campaigns, countersuits, but under the light of evidence, their threats rang hollow. Sarah and I retreated temporarily to Ms. Camilla's house. Quiet, safe, a place free from prying eyes. I watched Sarah navigate the early mornings heavier than before, her steps cautious, her gaze dragging at memories. But each day I saw a flicker, a shy smile, a hand painting in the sunlight, a meal she helped prepare. These small motions felt like small victories. I resumed my own work at the station. Patrols at Sarah's former neighborhood increased. I observed domestic violence cases with amplified empathy. Women who once walked into my precinct terrified now found me listening. I became more vocal, more present. My voice, hardened by my personal war, became a tool for others to see they were not invisible. One morning, neighbors who once greeted me coolly began nodding, offering soft words. "We didn't know. We're sorry. We believe you now." That shift stung, not from pride, but from sorrow at how easily voices were drowned in fear and rumor. Yet I accepted their apologies graciously, for healing required more than punishment. It required restoration of truth in community. Sarah's therapy continued. Her nightmares did not vanish overnight. She would wake, tearful, gasping, eyes panicked. I would sit by her side in the dark and whisper, "It's done. You're safe now." Over months, the terror receded. She began to sleep longer, smile more. I would find her humming in the kitchen, stirring soup, trying new recipes. Those small routines became reclaiming of self. One afternoon, as she chopped herbs, she turned to me. "I feel like me again, Mom." Her voice cracked with gratitude, surprise. I rested my hand on her shoulder. "Yes, you are again." But the scars remained. The whispers in the market, the cautious glances, the suspicion that Robert's supporters still lingered. I escorted Sarah to public places. I accepted support from protective detail even into daylight. Fear lingered like a shadow, but I refused to let it dictate our lives. In one memorable moment, Denise reappeared, not triumphant, just tentative. She sent a letter. "Thank you. I did what I could. I'm leaving town." She vanished quietly. I respected her wish. She had freed herself by telling the truth. Years later, Sarah found a job in accounting. She told me one evening over dinner. When I walked into that office, I felt the past tighten around my throat. But I walked in anyway. She laughed softly. "I'm going to build my life back. Step by step." I celebrated with her, real, full, fierce pride in her reclaimed freedom. I used my platform to start a support group at the precinct. For survivors, for women threatened, for mothers whose silences were too long. I spoke at community meetings, marched in awareness. I told my story, not for attention, but in hope that others would see themselves and find courage. In quiet hours, I would sometimes go to that same door where Sarah had collapsed. I would place a hand on the frame and remember the knock. I would remember the darkness inside me that night, and the turning point when I became not just her mother but her protector with law behind me. The world did not return to how it was, nor should it have, but we rebuilt something new. Our foundation was no longer fear. It was truth. It was honor. It was a promise not to let darkness erase our voices again. One evening, in the golden light of sunset, Sarah and I walked in a field near our home. She plucked wildflowers, laughed as petals fell in her hair. I watched her, whole, alive, stronger. The land restored beneath her feet. The legacy returned. The fight behind her, and before us. The horizon stretching to tomorrow, because justice is not an endpoint. It is a journey, a lifelong arc drawn from wounds into wisdom. So tonight, I close this chapter not with vengeance, but with healing, with renewed purpose, and with the knowledge that sometimes the fiercest battles are won not with violence, but with resilience, truth, and a mother's unshakable love. We survived. We rebuilt, and we still rise. The dust had settled, the courtroom closed, but the echoes of what transpired would ripple forward. In the stillness that followed, Sarah and I stepped into a life remade. Not perfect, not painless, but reclaimed. We walked home from the courthouse, the afternoon sun washing over our faces. She moved more steadily now, carrying herself with the quiet strength of someone who has endured. The land she lost and regained beneath her feet, our family's name restored, had more weight now. It was proof that the truth, when wielded with care, can cut through deception. Neighbors lined the sidewalks. Some stared, some nodded, some offered shy smiles. I recognized faces that once whispered behind screens or in quiet corners. Their stares were no longer suspicion. They were acknowledgement. It was the kind of small victory that lifts a heart. Inside, Sarah settled into her new routine. She returned to accounting work, small clients at first, rebuilding piece by piece. I watched her open mail she once feared. I watched her negotiate contracts, read statements, no longer shrinking from power, but wielding it cautiously. It filled something in me to see her doing what she once loved, fear now a memory at home. There were nights she cried still, nightmares, panic, but I remained beside her. I learned how to cradle her trauma, not to erase it. I urged her therapy, consistency, patience. I told her every day, you are safe. You deserve this rest. You deserve this life. Over time, the tremors faded. Some scars remained, but they became a map of her survival, not of her defeat. I resumed walking through the neighborhood. The once hostile glares softened. Miss Camila would wave from her door. Other neighbors would stop me, speak low apologies for disbelief, for siding with rumors. I nodded, with neither triumph nor condemnation, only acceptance. Their regrets were part of recovery. Today in the police station, my days felt different. When I responded to domestic violence calls, I entered with sharper eyes, greater empathy, and a fierceness born from having walked that road. Young women trembling at the threshold, silent in their pain. I became a bloodied mirror they could see themselves in. I became not just an officer, but a voice for those silenced. One evening, I spoke at a community gathering. I recounted the story, not in graphic detail, but so hearts would know. Violence hides in love's shadow. I talked about evidence, physical, digital, emotional, and how courage is first step. The crowd listened. Some cried, some nodded. I told them, you are not alone. Speak. The law, the community, your quiet inner voice. They can hold the weight of truth in my private hours. I would sit on the porch, stars above, Sarah's laughter trailing behind me in the house. I remembered the knock, the collapse, the broken face. I remembered the weight of discovering betrayal, the long hours compiling proof, the terror and the resolve. And I thought, that night wasn't an end, it was the threshold. I opened my journal and wrote a letter to my younger self, the woman who believed in protection with a badge, in love, in trust. I told her, you will fail, you will weep, but you will rise. I closed it, knowing the words had come from blood and purpose. Sarah came outside and sat beside me. She reached for my hand. We sat in silence, letting the breeze fall on us. Then she looked at me, her eyes steady, and said, I'm glad you didn't stay silent. In that moment, I felt every bruise, every fear, turn into a slow flame of hope and justice. The journey ahead was long. There would be appeals, scars, memories. But we now walked forward with eyes open, with voices unmuted. I rose, brushing off the dust of our trial, and looked toward tomorrow. The land beneath our feet was ours once more. Her voice was stronger. Our bond, mother and daughter, warrior and survivor, had been reforged. That night, I prayed not for peace without memories, but peace with memory. Not for absence of pain, but for the strength to transform it. Because legacy is not just what we end with, it's what we become despite what was done to us. And so we closed one chapter, but our story of justice, of healing, of voices reclaimed, would echo long after the courtroom's doors shut. The courtroom is quiet now, its echoes fading into memory, but what remains is more than judgment. It's a new beginning. When Sarah and I emerged from that building, we walked into a life remade by truth, resilience, and purpose. The morning sun bathed the courthouse steps with gentle gold. Sarah's hand in mine felt strong, steady. Her bruised face had begun to heal. Her spirit, scarred but awakened. Neighbors watched, some with curiosity, others with quiet respect. The world knew her story now, her courage, her pain, and her victory in the weeks following. Life shifted. The forged land transfer was reversed. Robert's access was cut. The court issued a protective order and legal penalties. The whispers in the neighborhood turned from suspicion to support. I could feel the tide changing. Yet the internal battles were not over. Sarah needed time. In the safety of Ms. Camilla's house, she slept longer, cried less, and gradually rediscovered normalcy. She started small, cooking dinner, returning calls, handling home tasks. The everyday became the battleground of healing. I watched, proud and cautious. I reminded her gently, strength isn't measured in how far you run. It's measured in having to stand again. She nodded, tired eyes but head lifted in the precinct. I resumed work, but I carried new purpose. Domestic violence cases were no longer just part of the job. They were deeply personal, infused with empathy and determination. Victims confided. I listened. I acted. And when I could, I shared Sarah's story, quietly, respectfully, with consent. On an evening when the station was quiet, I sat in my office drafting a support pamphlet. You are not alone. Your voice matters. We believe you. It was small, but I knew sometimes small changes build walls of safety at home. Sarah and I grew closer. We took long walks, shared late-night tea, laughed quietly and shared silence. The darkness of his betrayal no longer dominated our space. Our bond grew in what we rebuilt, not what was broken. One afternoon, a neighbor approached me in the market, the same woman who had whispered doubts months earlier. With eyes watery, she said, "I'm sorry. I judged too quickly. I believe you now." She hesitated. "Can you forgive me?" I paused. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting." I nodded, in gratitude. "Thank you for listening now." Because healing isn't just for the broken. It's for the bystanders, the ones who must shift to understand, to support, in quiet moments. I revisit the porch where Sarah had once knocked, bleeding. I stand there, hand on the doorframe, and let memory settle. I remember the urgency, the terror. I remember the promise I made. And I realized that night was the threshold, from fear to purpose. Sarah's voice returned. One day, she told me she had applied for a job in finance. "Mom," she said, with a tremor I recognized then as hope, "I want to build my own strength now." I hugged her. "You deserve that," I whispered. My daughter, once silenced by pain, now shaping her future in the community. Change followed our story. Support groups for abused women gained footing. Local shelters received new donations. The police station opened a hotline for domestic emergencies. It was progress steeped in collective courage. Years later, a young woman came into my precinct. Eyes red, hand trembling. She said, "My husband hit me." I sat beside her, offered tissues, a safe chair, a listening ear. In my heart, I remembered Sarah in those early hours, unprotected. I told her, "You're not alone. I know this path. We will walk it together." That night, I returned to my porch, breathing evening air. I looked at the stars. I thought of all that had been taken, all that had been fought for. And I whispered a prayer not for freedom from scars, but freedom through them. That each scar would become a story of survival. Not shame, because justice delivered is not the end. It is the foundation for what comes next. So tonight I close this chapter, but our story endures. Not as tragedy, but as testaments to the power of a mother's love, to the strength of a battered daughter who stood, to the courage of truth when darkness tries to silence it. We walk forward, scarred, yes, but sovereign, and we rise. The scars on Sarah's body may fade, but the wounds of betrayal, of silence, of being doubted, those take longer. But what Robert never expected was that the woman he mocked as just a cop would become his worst nightmare. The mother whose love burned hotter than justice itself. He tried to steal. He tried to silence. He tried to smear them both in front of an entire town. But what he didn't know is that when a woman rises, she carries truth like fire in her hands. And now, Robert's name is no longer whispered in fear, but remembered with disgust. Sarah, she found her smile again. And Elizabeth? She became a hero not just to her daughter, but to a whole town that had forgotten what courage looked like. This wasn't just revenge, this was restoration. And this was justice. If this story touched your heart, share it. Not for views, not for clicks, but because some woman out there right now needs to know she's not alone. Tell us below, what part hit you the hardest? And remember, one story shared can be a lifeline for someone else. Subscribe, like, comment, and never stay silent in the face of injustice.